Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today my group will present about learning unit 2, which is Formulation and Verification of Accounting Theory. Our group member name is Nur Ismahani binti Abdul Halim, Nur Atirah binti Muhammad, Maria Abigail Shilbroom. Our case study is Corporate Governance Disclosure by Spanish University. How different variables can affect the level of such disclosure by Javier Menderes, Domingo Martinez, and Manuel Ryan Georgi. Before we go through this case study, I will brief shortly about research journal. This journal about a research conducted by a group of students from University of Cadiz, Spain, on how corporate governance disclosure is published in university in Spanish and its effectiveness on the stakeholder, shareholder, management of the university. In addition, there are differences of opinion regarding the level of corporate governance disclosure has been influenced, such as private public status, institutional size, board diversity, and female participation on senior management team. In the end of this journal, researcher will come out some output to overcome this problem and recommend several ideas to upgrade level of corporate governance disclosure in annual report. These are questions given in the case study. Number 1, based on the reference, explain the case. Number 2, based on the extract of the case, explain your understanding on the adaptation of theories in that study. And number 3, explain your understanding of normative theory and how this case explain the adoption of such theory. For number 1, based on the reference, explain the case. These are the purpose of journal research case study. 40% of the public sector organization, include university, has been pressure for shareholder and stakeholder to be more accountable to society. This is because increased financing by government is causing university to modify their administration and management in order to become more open and accountable to the community. So, this research goal is to investigate the relationship between corporate governance, transparency, and accountability in the public sector. There are scarcity of material on corporate governance disclosure sourced in Spanish. Therefore, this research also examines how variables can influence the level of corporate governance disclosure made by Spanish institutions. These are variables that affect corporate governance disclosure. Number 1, public-private status of university is Spanish. Number 2, institutional size. Number 3, board diversity in board of directors at university. And lastly, female participation on senior management team. In variable number 4, they are also include about gender. So, these 5 are proposed hypotheses in the case study. Hypothesis number 1. Spanish public universities are more likely to disclose more corporate government information than others. Hypothesis number 2. Spanish larger universities are more likely to disclose more corporate governance information than others. Hypothesis number 3. Spanish universities with a higher proportion of elected members on their board are more likely to disclose more corporate government information than others. Hypothesis number 4. Spanish university whose rector is female are more likely to disclose more corporate government information than others. And lastly, hypothesis number 5. Spanish university with a higher female representation on their senior management team are more likely to disclose more corporate government information than others. So, in this case, in this research journal, these three are methodology of the case study. First step, sample. Researchers select the whole set of Spanish university identified by the Spanish university's rector conference. Step number 2, data collection. They perform a content analysis of the website of all Spanish university to respond to researchers' interest, which is existence of variable. And number 3, empirical analysis. Also carry out a multiple linear regression to test whether the proportion of online corporate governments disclosure are affected to different variables. So we will see 3 steps only to do this case study. So from the methodologies, these are the results from the research journal. Is content 2, which is exploratory analysis and statistical result. For exploratory analysis, all Spanish universities reveal 49.4% of all indicators identified in their website. Only 98.68% of universities are revealed 2 indicators identified in their website. For 3 indicators, there are 82.89% universities that are disclosed in their website. None of the Spanish These are the results from the research. Is contained 2 analysis, which is exploratory analysis and statistical result. For exploratory analysis, all Spanish universities reveal that 49.4% of all indicators identified in their website. Only 98.68% of universities are revealed 2 indicators in their website. For 3 indicators, there are 82.89% universities that are disclosed in their website. None of the Spanish university has disclosed about gender equality is considered in board appointment and selection. For statistical result, Table 2 show that the more transparent Spanish universities tend to be public and larger, and usually have a higher proportion of elect members and higher proportion of women in their senior management team. For table number 3, show institutional size, public-private status, and gender has been statistically significant for explaining the level of global corporate government disclosure by Spanish university. These are table 2 that I have talked before, which is Spearman's correlation coefficient. Table 3 about linear multivariate regression, result of the proportion of corporate government disclosure. For conclusion of this case, corporate government disclosure by Spanish institutions are far from appropriate and fail to fulfill stakeholder expectation. Public University in Spain has published more corporate government information than private institutions. Aside from that, the largest Spanish institutions have provided more information about corporate government issues than smaller ones. Furthermore, the researcher discovered that the board diversity and female presence on the senior management team had a minor impact on the amount of corporate government's transparency in Spanish institutions. Researchers recommend that politicians and regulators expand obligatory disclosure rules for private universities, and that Spanish legislation on openness and good governance include conclusive power to guarantee that institutions satisfy the disclosure obligation. Now, I will pass this presentation to the Maria. Thank you.
Next, I will explain on the adaptation of the theories based on the extract case. Based on the extract case, there are three theories in the adapt. Firstly, institutional theory, legitimacy theory, and stakeholder theory. Through these theories, public university could disclose more corporate governance information according to their requirement. Okay, firstly, institutional theory. Institutional theory focuses on the roles of social, political, economic system in which companies operate and gain their legitimacy. The approval of the law on transparency and good governance has introduced some mandatory reporting requirement for all public universities. Thus, when disclosures are mandatory, compliance with minimum reporting requirement is a condition to be legitimate. However, the influence of professional bodies such as standard setters has helped build desirable expectation within an institutional environment. Finally, this theory make it possible for public university to disclose for corporate governance and to be more transparent. Next is legitimacy theory. Legitimacy theories is companies disclose social responsibility information to present a socially responsible image so that they can legitimize their behavior to their stakeholders groups. Legitimacy theory is based on the idea that a social contract exists between business and society. The legitimacy theory states that the behavior of organization must be developed within the limits of what society considers desirable. This means that each organization must ensure that the social of its activity is consistent with what society considers as acceptable, and thus they can be legitimatized. According to the case, prior empirical research has explored whether public exposure measured through science or a sensitivity sector can affect the extent of the organization's financial and non-financial disclosures. In the university sector, this theory is relevant and necessary since public universities are publicly funded and they provide a public service to society. The transparent disclosure is vital to maintain a good governance of the public university. Next is stakeholder theory. The stakeholder theory highlights that each organization has a broad number of agents that are interested in the organization performance. The literature recognizes that some people have more power and interest in the organization's performance. Hence, according to the stakeholder theory, the organization will disclose corporate governance information to meet the demands of those stakeholders that are more influential for the organization, such as owners and suppliers are the main stakeholders for the public university. Within the university context, the main stakeholders are the governments and the staff, so university could use corporate governance disclosure to meet their needs and demands. So this theory is equally important to maintain a good governance in public university. Thank you.
The last question is explain your understanding of normative theory and how this case explains the adoption of such theory. What is normative theory? Normative theory shows the value, standards, or actual solution which contain critique of existing framework and consequently calls for a change to achieve better future. In other words, a normative theory aims to discover what should be and would include sentences like companies should follow corporate governance standards or manager ought to act in a manner to avoid conflict of interest. The first one is stakeholder theory, legitimacy theory, and institutional theory are linked to the corporate governance disclosure. The second one is by adopting the normative theory would be the best option for to provide the decision maker with desired outcomes and explaining to disclose corporate governance information. The third one is regulation-derived standard would establish a normative context that would support the institutionalizations of disclosure procedure. The fourth one is stakeholder theory has a normative thrust and closely linked to the way corporations work. For example, the needs of the government, which is primary funding source, public universities are obliged to provide growing quantities of corporate governance information. The fifth one is in normative aspects. Legitimacy are kind of connecting various actors and creating openness in the process or input for input and couple throughput. The goal is to create acceptance, support, and tolerance for output coming from governance networks. For example, handle public finances. Public colleges are more vulnerable to public criticism. They might utilize corporate governance disclosure to boost their social standing. The sixth one is rules of thumb, standard operating procedure, role expectation, codes of conduct, professional standards, and educational curricula are examples of normative features of institutions. For example, the influence of professional groups, such as standard-setting bodies, might aid in the development of good expectation within an institutional setting. This exemplifies the normative pressure exerted by institutional isomorphisms. And the public-private status. Based on the normative theory, it would be expected that Spanish public institutions might have higher level of corporate governance information sharing if they are more visible in society, and they may be able to leverage the disclosure of corporate governance information to strengthen their standards. And the next one is institution size, because they in which lies social existence of norms, larger Spanish institutional might reveal more corporate governance information than smaller ones. And the board diversity is according to the normative theory, such university will reveal more corporate governance information in order to follow the standards and better practices which will accelerate progress. And the last one is female participation on senior management team. It is already shown that female participation on senior management teams that describe the normative study, which, according to the case, female managers are more concerned with ethical and social issues than with economic concern.